The Dominican order in Palestine, not in Palestine, but the Dominican order generally, were the people that ran the Inquisition in the Middle Ages. They were known as the Dominicani, a joke on their name, the hounds of the Inquisition, cane being a joke on cani, Dominicani. This head of the Dominican order in Palestine, who was also head of another institution called the École Biblique, which was the center of French Vatican archaeology in Palestine, and in fact it was Vatican archaeology. It had been set up in the late 1890s to make the results of modern archaeology palatable to its co-religionists. That is, to serve them a portion of modern archaeology that would not counterindicate or run too much against the faith. A sanitized view of modern archaeology. Unfortunately, the École Biblique was Johnny on the spot to deal with the Dead Sea Scrolls when they came into Jerusalem, and I'll explain that in a moment how that happened. Probably the best description of that process is this book here. This is a book by Michael Baget and Richard Lee, which I cooperated with, whom some of you may know from their earlier work, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Messianic Legacy, and works of that kind. And they came to me when they heard what was going on and what we could clue them into, and we cooperated to some extent on this book. A lot of the footnotes refer, as you may have seen, if those who've read it, to my work. So they go into it extremely well in the Dead Sea Scroll deception, and this is conspiracy theory par excellence. But I think I read over the manuscript before they published it, and I may not know anything, and I may just be, full of hot wind as well. But I can tell you this, I couldn't find any errors once I had done looking it over. I mean, we corrected about 50 bloopers. But once the bloopers were taken out, I couldn't see any errors. And I don't know any scholar who's ever looked at this book and has been able to cavil with the data in it, with the facts. The facts are all solid. The interpretation of the data people dispute, but the facts are there, and nobody can counterindicate any of their facts or data. The interpretation is a matter for any of you to decide for yourself, looking at the data. But you can get this book and look at it, and it's a good introduction to what happened, and I know that because, as I said, I pored over it and helped them to develop it. But in any event, this one point about the destruction of the scrolls, the École Biblique, which they go into in great detail in this book, decided that to encourage the Bedouin to bring the material in, they would pay them by the square centimeter of material that was brought in. So, for instance, you have all these little fragments here paid for by the square centimeter. So there couldn't be a black market price, and the price wouldn't run up. Well, it turns out that the Bedouin worked in work gangs. And you say, well, what are the Bedouin doing everything? Because the archaeologists of the École Biblique were basically sitting in the École Biblique drinking. They're never going out into the field. So you say, well, so what, the Bedouins were in work gangs? Yes. So when they finished their work, to get their square centimeter pay, they would rip up the manuscripts and give it to each other and take it up to Jerusalem so that each person on the work gang would get his share. So they didn't care about whole manuscripts or little manuscripts. So some people could see ignorance there, which is what I generally feel, but others might see something more worrisome, which is what Baget and Lee would see. So we don't know. Someone asked me, how come the scrolls were so fragmentary? Why are they so ripped up like that? And so we don't know if it's all because of decay or it's partially because of the methods that were employed in collecting the scrolls. So let me go back and explain what the scrolls were, where they were found, and how this all happened. Qumran is here, and around here there are limestone cliffs. And this is the Dead Sea over here. In the limestone cliffs are caves. Many of you heard the scrolls were found in 1947-48 by a Bedouin shepherd. That's not exactly the truth. there were 2 grown men who were treasure hunters and 1 younger man who they sent into the caves because he could squirm in. But the known grown men were looking for treasure all the time. And they're the ones who had thrown the stone into this particular hole while they were perhaps tending sheep part-time looking for treasure, and heard, instead of clatter, 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 maybe in 1946, no one knows exactly when this occurred because we don't know how accurate the stories are, maybe 1947, kaplunk, 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 as the pottery broke. So they knew something was in the cave, and then they sent this other chap, a younger boy in, Muhammad Dib, but he did some things they disapproved of, the 2 older chaps, and so they're the ones who actually got control of everything and threw him out, so he wasn't really part of the whole thing in the first place. But that cave found, with these materials in it, an amazing cave. If you've been to Israel, many of you may have or have seen it, they have a thing called the Shrine of the Book, which looks something like that, like an upside-down acorn. How many have seen that? It's called the Museum. It's near the Parliament building, isn't it? Why does it look like an upside-down acorn? That's the top of a scroll jar. They're trying to make it look like the lid of a scroll jar. These things were found in scroll jars, like that. And inside this, in cave 1, we number these caves according to when and where they were found, and the order in which they were found, and whether they bore manuscripts. There are 11 manuscript-bearing caves. But we, in the West, at the beginning of the scroll problem, only heard about 1, cave 1. And in these jars were manuscripts like this. An incredible find, a stupendous find. The 10 or 11 scrolls in the Israeli Museum of the Book come from these jars. I think 3 of which had manuscripts in them, 10 of which were empty, which means that they had been either found in the past or something else happened, and it's unclear where the other 10 manuscript jars disappeared to. But the 3 manuscript jars produced the 10 or 11 scrolls, almost full scrolls, you see in the Israeli Museum of the Book. Those scrolls were published almost immediately without problems. There's a lot of hanky-panky which Beijing Lee and others have described that tell you what the events were that led up to the sale and buying of the scrolls. They start their book by speaking about an ad that appeared in the Wall Street Journal in 1954. Scroll